how beautiful to be together and Carl Jung Society and speaking about integral. And Jung gifted us this very gift of integral, the integration of personality. And the spirit there is how do we connect the conscious and the unconscious. But the unconscious is not just unconscious as understood in a Freudian way, but the unconscious is the possible. The unconscious is the super consciousness that is yet to be realized. And that is the gift of thinking. For example, Chittaranjan Das, had reflected that the unconscious that is there in the Indic tradition, and that unconscious is related to the Brahma consciousness, the consciousness of creation. So therefore, how inspiring it is to be with you all as you are working and meditating. And I join with respect with Carl Gustav Jung, his sadhana of the integral. And our dear and inspiring Lisa also has been cultivating the path of integral, with language, with modes of thinking. So therefore, to this symphony of meditation and action, to this symphony of creativity that I offer, this sharing about integral development. So as we begin, I wish to offer this poem as bread is a very deep foundation of life, bread and water. And in the Christian tradition, so the sacrament, the bread and the water, but bread is also the foundation of life. In Taittiriya Upanishad, it is written, Arnam Brahmeti Bijanama. Realize Arna as Brahma. And then it goes on. Pranam Brahmati Bijana. Realize Prana as Brahma. Then Ananda Brahmeti Bijana. Realize Ananda as Brahma. And then it goes on to say, Ananda Brahmani Vidwan na Bhedachan. The Vidwan, the knower, once he or she realizes Brahma as Ananda, and there is no fear. So what profound set of possibilities and realities are presented before us. And that is the nurturing spring of the integral. For example, we realize that we suffer from an unreflective disjunction between bread and Brahma, Arna and Ananda, matter and the spirit. But in all paths of life, including the path of Lord Jesus Christ, there is a deep interconnection between the material and the spiritual, where the matter itself is spirit singing. So cultivating integral development builds upon this human journey of being with matter, being with spirit, finding their multiple connections, including the disjunction between matter and spirit that has been created by false consciousness. False consciousness understood in a very broad way, but also different structures of social organizations, different structures of economy, for example. Today, our current social and economic system. Now, this produces matter in such a way that we are not, enabled to realize the spirit that is there in the matter. So the disjunction between the matter and spirit is not a part of reality, but it is produced by social, economic, and political system to really perpetuate varieties of structures of domination. So as I offer this book, Cultivating Integral Development, I offer this poem. And the name of the poem is Bread, Truth, and Water. I have no need. I can run without water and bread. But how long? I cannot live without truth and trust, love and faith, but how we can combine both. So, therefore, integral development is that journey of living together with bread, water, truth, and trust. And so, with this, I come to some slides, please. I request Lisa to kindly. So this is then the next one. So this is the book Cultivating Integral Development, and this is a foreword by Professor Fred Dalmeyer, himself a great seeker and sadhaka, and who in his own life he lived, a life of integration and dialogue across cultures. And speaking about development, so almost 25 years ago, so after visiting India, he wrote a very profound essay on development, where Professor Dalmeyer says that the whole discourse and practice of development is imprisoned in an enlightenment black box. And that black box is we have been put into a black box away from nature on the one hand and the divine on the other. But today, therefore, the cultivating integral development, drawing inspiration from the deep and the immortal, work of people like Fred Dalmeyer, who is simultaneously a sadhaka and a seeker of knowledge, and inspiring transformative thinking and action. Now, how integral development is therefore first to realize our imprisonment within the black box, and then say, no, we are not born to be imprisoned. And how do we create varieties of bridges? So, how do we create enlightenment bridges? And with nature, with divine, and with ourselves. So, therefore, bridge building. In India, we have a beautiful term called sutra. And you might know that some of the very deep thoughts in Indian traditions are kind of woven together like a sutra, Brahma Sutra. And a novelist has written a book called the River Sutra. And of course, we have the very beautiful and inviting book called Kama Sutra that many people read. And similarly, how do we weave a development sutra? And that development sutra is that, like, threading, our sisters, and they are very good in threading, but that thread work today should spread to everybody. So how do we, therefore, integral development is that meditation, vision, and practice of thread work. We and enlightenment bridges threading and linking to the Upanishadic statement that we are not afraid of anybody, but development is connected to fear and terror. And if you look at the history of development in Western society, like the Industrial Revolution. Now, in Britain, for example, in Scotland, you can feel that even now, as I was visiting Scotland in 2007, and this beautiful Scottish countryside. But what hides this beauty is the terror that has gone into it. Because people who were tilling their land, they were terrorized, they were evicted from their land so that they become cheap and free laborers for the upcoming industrial revolution. And in the name of development today, development as displacement, and today techno-capitalism and extractive economy, if you look at, that all these things associated with terror of displacement. So how do we, and the violence of development, how do we realize this still terror and violence that goes on, and in all societies, including America, the destruction of the indigenous land and people, and the pain and suffering. And so therefore, building development bridges, development sutra, but this building also trust, fearlessness. And today, in terms of integral development, development is not just external development, given the kind of fear and anxiety that is being created by system through technology, for example. Now, surveillance and everything. So how do we create an ecology of trust and fearlessness, overcome fear? And that has both a structural dimension as well as a soulful dimension. Even if structurally there would be a lot of structural apparatus for production of fear, but we create still conditions of fearlessness through love, through mutual support, through civil society organizations, through creating legal communities which would support us rather than become an instrument in the surveillance apparatus of the big tech, state, and market. So moving on. So the next slide, please. So this book is dedicated to K. Viswanathan, and Viswanathan is a very inspiring, seeker in the path of development. He was born into a rather, on a little bit of marginalized community in the Kerala society. And it is almost like an untouchable position, say 100 years ago. And being born in that space, he studied and he came to Santiniketan, the great, place of learning that Rabindranath Tagore had established. And studying there, and that itself is a very integral way of learning the art, science, and Tagore himself, as he was a great poet, many of us do not know his great love for science. Because today, in terms of integral development, the disjunction between science and literature that has happened, we need scientists who are poets, and at the same time, poets who are scientists, both to the extent possible in its own very complexity of knowledge, but also the spirit of science. So Tagore's university, Santiniketan, nurtured that sense of the integral. And just to connect another story, when Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, came back from South Africa, and he didn't have a home in India to stay. So he and his wife Kasturba and his troop, and 15, 20 of them, and they came to stay in Santiniketan. And when Tagore Gandhi came to stay in Santiniketan, and in terms of integral, Gandhi brought this emphasis that, dear Rabindranath, very good, you are also very good singing, but while you are singing, bring your hand, do your own work. And that spirit of Gandhi is that please clean your own, bathrooms, because at that time it is the low caste people who are, assigned the role of the cleaning of our bathrooms, for example. Gandhi was cleaning his own bathroom, and that was the spirit in the Tolstoy farm that Gandhi had built in South Africa. So again, you see, Gandhi's being in Santiniketan was an occasion for bringing the mind and the heart and the hand together. And then Amartya Sen, you might know that he's a very deep thinker. He has written on development, including 25 years ago. He has a book called Development as Freedom. Amartya Sen has recently gifted a book called A Home in the World. And he's writing that when we were studying in Santiniketan, because we studied in Tagore, we are a bit, with Tagore, we are a bit kind of, our orientation was much more towards Tagore than Gandhi. But Sen reflects that as I go on, as I grow up, as I grew up, I could see the beauty in Gandhi's emphasis of working with your hand, walking on the bare feet on soil. And later on, Amartya Sen came to study in Cambridge. And then his teacher was Sraffa, an economist from Italy. And then Sraffa was a friend of the great language scholar and philosopher Wittgenstein. So Sraffa, and as Wittgenstein and Sraffa were working together in Cambridge, Sraffa challenged Wittgenstein to realize the significance of body and practice in the path of the linguistic. So in a way, Sraffa's emphasis dialogue with Wittgenstein helped to bring the practical dimension to language, as Gandhi brings the practical dimension of labor to the process of human development. So the book is dedicated to Viswanathan, who studied in Santiniketan. And at the same time, Viswanathan, as he was influenced by Tagore, he was influenced by Gandhi. And after his study, he didn't want to take a government job. He came back to his own community and started a community development initiative in his own village called Mitra Niketan. It means an abode of friends. And in the path of life, Viswanathan got to interact with Arthur Morgan. You might know Arthur Morgan, the great, technologist, engineer, and the educator of USA, who was the first chairman of the Tennessee Valley Authority. It is Arthur Morgan who brought this emphasis to, at that time, the Roosevelt administration, that when we are building a dam on the river like Tennessee, it is not so much as the engineering work of building a dam, but how do we build communities? Because the people that is devastated. So therefore, Tennessee Valley Authority was not just an engineering adventure, it was an initiative in community building and integral development. And taking cue from Arthur Morgan is a very creative and critical and effort in building communities, and not only technology, market, and state. Morgan also, you might know that he established the Antioch College. And Antioch College has been a very important center of learning and formation in America. Some of the best minds of America have been nurtured in Antioch College. And the spirit of the Antioch is also integral in the sense that both community learning, handwork, and mental learning go together. So this is Viswanathan, and he interacted with Arthur Morgan. He came to Yellow Springs, Ohio, as Arthur Morgan also came to Mitra Niketan. And when I was visiting Mr. Viswanathan and Mitra Niketan in 1991, so I found a book there by Arthur Morgan, a small booklet called It Can Be Done Through Education. Then the other dedicatee is David Blake Willis, and he's a creative thinker. He teaches at Fielding Graduate School in Santa Barbara, USA. The next one, please. Then these are some of the titles from the chapters. First, part one is called Cultivating Integral Development, Ethics aesthetics, responsibility, and creative spirituality. And in this section, varieties of themes are explored: integral development, where there is an effort to look at development as simultaneously material and spiritual. There is also the development of an idea of spiritual pragmatism, the pragmatic and the spiritual, and some related thoughts. The second chapter tries to bring art, spirituality, and social transformations together. And another aspiration of this chapter is to bring the ethical and the aesthetic together, because the ethical and aesthetics are related, but for varieties of reasons, there has been a lot of gap between them. So integral development is simultaneously ethical and simultaneously aesthetic. At the same time, rethinking and transforming both the ethical and the aesthetics in a rather closed way that we have been indoctrinated. The third chapter is poetics of development, which uh, tries to bring the poetry of development, as development has been very much enslaved to the logic of economics and engineering, and how poetry is at the same time is a very important part of development. How do we sing as we build? And the fourth chapter is looking at democracy and development, how we again from look at bring ethics, aesthetics, politics, creative spirituality, and responsibility. The fifth chapter is Swaraj as blossoming and Satyagraha as co-realization. So this is a dialogue with Gandhi, two of his very deep, practices. One is Swaraj. What is Swaraj? Swaraj is kind of being autonomous, one way, that we are autonomous. Secondly, Swaraj means Suraj. That means we hold our head high. Our mind, you know, is already, colonized. Our mind is dominated by very factors. In Veda, there is the idea of Suraj. You see, now earlier times, some kings they wore the mukuta, that kind of. And now President Biden does not wear, but even if he does not wear, so that is there. So the point is that Swaraj, the idea that Gandhi developed, that each one of us, we become ruler of ourselves. At the same time, as we are ruled by a government, or the government also rules us in such a way that it is not abuse of power, but both the government, ourselves, each other, our self-rule, my self-rule is a precondition for our mutual belonging. You rule yourself, I rule yourself. So this idea of Swaraj, which in my essay, I tried to link Swaraj to Saharaj. That means our sovereignty together. You are sovereign, I am sovereign, but my sovereignty and your sovereignty, how it does not collide with each other. So we find we try our best. As we are sovereign, we also develop non-sovereignty, and we develop non-sovereignty in a sacred way, and in a divine way. In that sense, we try to free ourselves from ego, both individual and collective, so that our Swaraj, our self-rule, does not become a terror for other. So it requires a practice of Saharaj, of we ruling each other through not only sovereignty, but our non-sovereignty, our many creative binding. And Satyagraha, that very important thought that Gandhi has practiced. How do we realize development also as Satyagraha? Now, development as freedom, development as economic development, but at the same time, development also needs to relate to truth. Today, as development is becoming more and more violent, so how do we create the capacity for resistance? And that resistance is not just violent kind of contestation. When it is absolutely necessary, there is no puritanical a priori, dictum that we can never use a weapon to fight injustice. But while even using weapon, we are using weapon when we have been pressed to annihilation. But our modality is satyagraha, that I have been forced to fight for beauty, dignity, and dialogue. But I'm doing it not to just kill others, not to seek revenge, but I'm doing it for the blessing of you and me together. So satyagraha is not only resistance, but co-realization, in which both the person who is doing satyagraha against whom it is done, it is together. Then the next one, please. The next slide, please. Then there is a chapter called Socio-Spiritual Mobilization for Development, Swadhyaya and beyond, because most of the time in development studies, we look at socio-political mobilization. But in my study, I have looked at socio-spiritual movements, like in the USA, the Habitat for Humanity. Yes, kindly be in that, in this slide, please. Habitat for Humanity, as it draws upon Christian tradition, and it talks about the economics of Jesus and the theology of Hema, and how we try to understand it also as an initiative in development. Habitat for Humanity, you might have been aware of this. My PhD work was on it. In India, we have a similar movement of practical spirituality called Swadhyaya. And then the next chapter tries to relate development to cross-cultural understanding, because development in our own individual life also, because our vision of development could be very monocultural, you know, and but then once in our own life, we interact with more cultures. Even in our own America is a gift of so many cultures, including the indigenous cultures of the Americas, And so, like our respected friend Glenn Aparacio Pari, so in his book Original Thinking, that Lisa also has brought in her book on language. So look at, Glenn's thinking. Glenn's, is nourished by a very deep cross-cultural realization. So therefore, the cross-cultural realization, it requires work. And that is a reality in each one of us, wherever we are staying. So how in our individual life, we create much more cross-cultural competence, cross-cultural learning ability, and also in the life of a culture, society, and state. So today, now all societies, in the context of war and the kind of investment in war, and instead of that, if we had just invested not only financially, but morally, spiritually, intellectually, in cross-cultural understanding, and then we all would have been safer. So in this chapter, I bring this idea of development as cross-cultural understanding, which requires a practice of a different kind of hermeneutics. And this hermeneutics is not a closed hermeneutics, because our closed cultural frame is accompanied by a closed reading of our own society, self, and the text. For example, in America, now Bible is very important for some people. There is also the term called the Bible Belt, and very important. But we also have very deep, Christians, including Billy Graham. You know, when I was reading his book, Billy Graham's book on the Holy Spirit, and I am reading this book. Now I get down in Beijing airport and then take a bus or something. I'm waiting in the Beijing South Station, and it is 4 o'clock in the night. And then the book Billy Graham's Holy Spirit is with me, and just reading Billy Graham under the open sky, and the kind of when Billy Graham is writing on the Holy Spirit, and there it is not just Christian, even despite Graham, the kind of the unbound spirit of the Spirit that flows in Billy Graham's book on the Holy Spirit. And many friends, as Bhagavad Gita, for example, has been a companion, a friend for many people, including many Christians. So when Christians they read Bible at the same time reading Gita, as Hindus read Gita while having read both Quran and Bible and others, so there is a possibility the word speaks to us also with multiple openness that we can dream of. So this is the path of multi-topial hermeneutics in the sense that our readings, the books that we read, and at the same time we can read related other books. In India, we have a very important theme called Swadhyaya, and it is part of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Yama and Niyama, Sadhyaya, study of self, studying books. But that Swadhyaya is also Sahadhyaya, studying together. So integral development today, as much as we can read together. And for example, in American society, you might know that the great debates about the great book traditions, that but which books we should read. Now, most of the time it is limited to Western classics. But many people within America, they have also tried to broaden the canons, including books from the Afro-American experience. And today, America is a microcosm of the world, So therefore, this multi-topial hermeneutics in terms of reading, we have to expand as much as possible. And the point is that we are not fated to be as closed as we have been created today. We are not fated to be closed. We have not been born to be prisoners of many closures that has been created for us. So in this chapter, there is a conversation with Confucianism and Vedanta, because Vedanta, which talks about the unity of life, and that unity of life, how we realize it as a practical unity. Confucianism talks about harmony. So in this essay, there is an effort to learn together with the idea of harmony from Confucianism and the idea of unity from Vedanta, in the way, how do we rethink harmony as not just harmony in the name of harmony, we dominate each other, because sometimes Confucianism, when it has become a state religion and the religion of the family, where family is patriarchal, then a family harmony has emphasized patriarchal structure, and it has not given space to children and women. Now, today there are many women within Confucian path who are also Confucian at the same time. They are pleading for harmony, and their becoming feminist is not just to be antagonistic to males, but trying to find different harmonious modalities of intergender relations. And it requires a transformation of harmony as domination to what can be called as transformative harmony. Similarly, unity in Vedanta is a living unity. And that unity is not the a priori unity proposed by the state or by society. Then quickly moving to the next chapter, it is called evolutionity and the calling of evolutionary suffering and evolutionary flourishing. Dialogues among epochs and cultivating new pathways of planetary realizations. Now, how do we realize our contemporary condition. You might know that we, our contemporary condition has been characterized as postmodern, for example. Now, on the backdrop of modern and modernity, we want to be modern and we want to kind of say that we are not traditional. So development, our sense of identity has an anxiety of distancing ourselves from tradition and being modern. And when modern has created a lot of darkness, including modernity and Holocaust, because modernity is not just reason, modernity is also colonialism, modernity is also Holocaust. And Zygmunt Bauman wrote about it, the great thinker, Holocaust. And today we are all, in the midst of another very painful Holocaust that is going on. Several of this that is going on. But in this context, we realize our contemporary moment is a moment of evolutionity. And that idea has been developed by a dear friend and a very great thinker from Poland, Koporowski, Julian Koporowski, and whom I met in a very interesting way. So this essay develops this idea of evolutionity, but brings this idea of evolutionary suffering. Because if our contemporary world requires evolutionary transformation, and for example, there is so much of war and violence going on, but we realize it is not sustainable, then some of us, we have to suffer to create the capacity of our state and institutions to transition from a kind of ready-made violence to working out varieties of pathway of reduction of violence, at least. Reduction of violence on the way to no harm. No harm on the way to ahimsa. So therefore, for development, we need to prepare ourselves for suffering, not in a sadistic or masochistic way that Eric Fromm challenged us. But how do we at the same time prepare ourselves for suffering? And that becomes a path of flourishing. The next one, I'll just take another 5-10 minutes and then we would have time for discussion. Then here I discuss the idea of how integral development requires a transformation of political economy, moral economy. It also calls for moral sociology and spiritual ecology. Then I discuss the chapter 10, Beyond the Chains of Illusions of Inclusive Development, Poverty, Creativity, and Challenges of Transformation. Poverty, for example, we know that poverty is a great challenge before us. But our approach to poverty has been totalizing. Because the war metaphor in the 1960s, President Johnson, he gave the slogan on war on poverty. But the point is that beyond the war on poverty and war on drugs, war continues, the poverty continues, and the drugs are continuing. There is no change there. So, but how do we realize poverty? Not in the sense that poor people are only objects of our, pity. How do we realize poverty in the spirit of Lord Jesus Christ, in the spirit of Saint Francis of Assisi? Poverty as a way of life, and in a practical sense, that way of life is manifested in living simply. And when I was doing field work on Habitat for Humanity, or let us say when I was living with Habitat for Humanity, its founder, Millard Fuller, it draws on the biblical story that, you can have, you cannot have two hearts. If you have more than one heart, it's not necessary. And then one person asked, okay, I need many hearts, but how can I not have more than two homes? And can one live in more than two homes at the same time? The point is that the ideology of development has created a culture of conspicuous consumption, and much of it is not necessary. And as much awakening as we can gather, just to reduce a little bit, and that would go a long way for creating happiness in our own life, including creating resources that is required for transformation of alleviation of material poverty. But one important challenge is that those whom we call poor people are already creative. Poor people are not just poor, they are integral beings like you and me. And their need is not just basic need, as Abraham Maslow said, that is again another unfortunate hierarchy that we have to interrogate and transfer. As much love that each one of us need, poor people not only need as much love, poor people already have that much love. And it is the love and creativity of the economically marginalized that enables them to live. Think of the homeless people in our cities in America, how they are living. Is it only by the soup kitchen? It is the integral love and creativity that they have among each other. Then quickly, the next chapter brings the idea of Purusartha and development. In India, we have the idea of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Mukhya, and how development in our own life needs Dharma, a sense of right thinking and conduct. We need Artha, wealth, but Artha, another meaning of Artha is meaning, and Kama, desire. But there is a distinction between desire, which devours, and desire, which flourishes, in which we grow together, and Mukhya as salvation. Our Mukhya today, for example, is not just salvation in the other world, how we realize salvation in our relationships, in our society, in our relationship with nature, in our garden, for example. I am also editing another book called Cultivating Gardens of God. And here there is an idea of a new leadership. And that leadership is not just a managerial leader or leader of state, market, technology, and society. We need to develop atmic planetary leadership. That means a leader is simultaneously listening to his or her soul, developing the soul dimension. And this soul dimension is coming in a very silent way, very silent way. And with respect, I want to give the example. In the very difficult circumstance now, even President Biden, he asked this question. He just asked this very silent question in a whispering way. He says that whether killing Ismail Hania in Iran, whether it was right and whether it is leading to the process. And President Biden could ask this question. I think it was not just a geopolitical question. He was not totally deaf to the voice of his soul. And we know it's a very difficult geopolitical question. But even in the very geopolitical question, a question like this embodies a leader who is not totally deaf to one's soul. And though we would like to have more soulful listening, but the little that we are getting is an inspiration for us to think of leadership as also soulful and also planetary, in the sense that we listen to the Mother Earth, and our leadership has this reality of the planet and not just my corporation, my nation state. And the next chapter develops the idea of corporate spiritual responsibility, not only corporate social responsibility, in the way rethinking corporation as not just profit maximizing machines, but corporations also have a soul. How do we develop the soul of corporation? By realizing those of us who work in the corporation, we are also integral beings. And I would just make a small proposal here. And again, I would be concluding in just 2 to 3 minutes. That is our very idea of corporation and legal person. And therefore, in the name of corporation, we can pollute everything, but we are not accountable. Secondly, that those of us who are work in the corporate spaces. Now, our workspace was designed 150 years ago. Our view of the human was we are mainly a machine, and our workplace is a mechanical place. Now, today, how we redesign our workplace in such a way that 1 hour lunch break that we have, half an hour we can eat lunch, and most of the time we can have even potluck lunch, in the in our working space. At least we can spend 10 minutes just to make a little salad we can bring, and John can make an Indian curry and Lisa a salad, and but as we come and eat together, and that is the spirit of life. And Bible talks about the Eucharist. And so our corporate space become a Eucharistic space. But after eating, let us sleep. And of course, if sleeping together is wishful hubris, but let us sleep. So therefore, the corporations need to design resting place and think of, now if we can sleep together, no, sorry, sleep for half an hour, then what kind of the body, mind, soul that gets regenerated. And it is not impossible. The kind of money we are wasting on medicine and workouts and anxiety and all these things, we can help each other to be more healthy. And just the final one is the next one. Some of the other chapters are, one is sustainable development, the other is on planetary lokosangraha, idea of lokosangraha as coming together. Then the chapter on development as grace, because what modernity has forgotten is the reality of grace. And because in the name of secularism does not mean that we would have to embrace ourselves from all realities of grace. There is a grace of nature, there is a grace of the divine, and there's a grace of mutuality. And then the chapter on yoga and tantra of development. And Lisa has already kindly read a line from that, and concluding with gardens of God. So thank you for your kind, being together, and now move towards our mutuality of conversations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ananta, for going through the book in a very personal sort of way. I really appreciate that. Um, so, gosh, I took so many notes. I don't know quite where to start, but I think I'm going to start back with the title of your book, and just ask. So, so I practice a lot of Chinese um, spiritual development type of activities, and the Chinese use the word self-cultivation a lot for these kinds of spiritual practices, um, because you are working on multiple levels of yourself. You're doing physical exercises, you're working on your energy body, and so I'm wondering, you have both the word cultivating in the title and the word development. And I'm wondering if you see, like, what kind of a difference do you see between cultivating and development?
So thank you, Lisa. Yes. So cultivating has a kind of multiple ways of organic relationality, and organic in a very, open sense. We cultivate our soil, soul, and in the Chinese tradition, the self formation and development. This word, this word, and this current history does not have that kind of a multiple organic relationship, and it emerges from a much more mechanical worldview, and its practice very mechanical, and possibly cultivating development is therefore in a way to bring these streams together, including interrogating a very mechanical and one-dimensional view of development.
Hmm. Okay, yes. Yes, that's interesting. So in a way, it's bringing the organic and the mechanical together.
and, and, and in the way that not only we sing, the machines also sing. And uh, and how what we call mechanical itself, and the kind of the respect, the beauty that is there, and how we need to, that because we work with machines, we work with matter, but the matter also has also a cultivating dimension in the sense that the matter constitutes us. And so if we are respectful to matter and machine, and we can build the science fiction, but we know at a very deeper level, at the consciousness level, that kind of a respect to matter, respect to machine, it creates an ecology of flourishing rather than just throwing out the machines. Because today what has happened is that we have a technology of obsolescence. Is throw away technology just to feel for, just think of, a phone that is with me, and if I lose, do I shed a tear for that? It's almost, it's like as much as my beloved has been there, and this also has been with my, and if I lose it, well, there's a tear for that.
Do you have anything to say, John, David? Anybody online?
I had a question.
Okay.
You mentioned something earlier that I thought really resonated with me and was hoping to circle back to that. You spoke early on about how our scientists need to be poets, and that seemed really poignant. And we've had plenty of examples throughout history, but especially in 2020, for example, where the sort of failure of the scientists and the health professionals to be able to communicate and engender trust in order to do their jobs properly. There was a serious breakdown there. They were unable to communicate or reach the people they needed to help with the information that they needed to hear. I was hoping to get you to talk to that just in that particular reference to how would a better development have made that problem less severe?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And your, uh, oh, Ivan, thank you.
Even, yeah.
Now, in health professionals, the doctors, I know a doctor, just to begin with this experience. I know a doctor friend of mine who is a poet, and he is also a rheumatologist, and he works in Sweden. So we are childhood friends from Odisha. Among other things, we have jumped to the river together. And even we do that when we meet now. at our age of only sweet 60, 60. So my friend Rabinarayan Das, and I would introduce you, and maybe at some point we can have him as a partner of conversation. So he's a doctor and a very kind and careful doctor, and he writes poems, essays, and novels in 3 languages. And he says that his patients, they look for his poetry books, and this poetry book has been a great healing companion in the process. And during COVID-19 also, there was a bit of work on that. Now, what happened during the COVID, apart from the fact that there was a lot of unnecessary unkindness, because we have
Distrust.
anxiety, mistrust, and a kind of irresponsibility, well, which is linked to life and death. And that kind of irresponsibility, how we make sense of that? Now, everybody had to be more responsible. And how do we become responsible in that sense? That poetry and song helps us to overcome our anxiety and mistrust.
Right.
And then the kind of anxiety we had, hospitals and everything. Think of if there were much more chaplains. We have a very beautiful spirit of the university chaplain, hospital chaplain, in these anxious movements, reassuring each other, that moment of life and death, and a different way of cultural work. And doctors are also human beings, so, and then scientists also. Today, what we need in our learning, for example, in the medical school, there is a little bit of in American medical education as part of American general education. There is an openness to science and humanities at the same time, which requires much more. And yes.
I it really spoke to me because classically, for decades, scientists have had this very difficult time talking to the public in general and the media in particular. They are unable to sort of just render their message into something that can be readily received. The development or cultivation of communication is just inadequate for the important work that they're doing. So I was trying to make a connection there, and it seemed fairly appropriate. So thank you for expanding on that.
Thank you.
I'd like to add a little something more, Evan, because I work peripherally. I'm not a scientist, but I work with scientists, and one of the important aspects of science that scientists themselves often overlook is the metaphoric nature of the language they use. At the core of scientific theories, in particular, are metaphors. And poetry, if you think poetically, you are more conditioned to call upon more metaphor. And I think that's also a great way to develop the ability to become innovative. Because when you're thinking metaphorically, you can expand the connections between different concepts. And
Totally.
yeah, I've tried to work with some scientists over the years to help them develop the ability to first recognize the metaphors they're using and then try to come up with new ones. And in coming up with new metaphors, they can open up the possibilities for what they can then research.
Yeah, and having a better grasp of metaphor and poetry in general will make you a better, among other things, a better teacher. And that's sort of, the scientists, they go and make their discoveries, but then they need to bring them back to the rest of the world and have them do good. And in order to do that, having a more varied, nuanced approach is perforce what is required, but that is not the core of their profession. So at least the way it is in modern times, it is. In the past, there was poetry and music and science were far more intertwined, but it's sort of gone by the wayside, and I think that's a little sad and a little problematic in a sense.
Yeah, so David is here. David is an actual scientist and he wants to say something.
Former
Yeah.
scientist. Having some experience in this field, uh, I think one of the challenges, which you haven't alluded to yet, is that science is not about getting the right answer.
Mhm.
Science is about experimenting to arrive at some meaning to the data. How do we explain what we see? And there is no right answer to that. The explanation is, okay, this is the explanation of the day, and that's as much as we know. So the challenge is how to communicate that to the ordinary person in a way in which it doesn't say the scientists don't know anything.
Right.
That's part of the challenge, is communicating the fact that scientists are doing the best they know how to do, and they are arriving at solutions to problems in the best way that they know how to do. But that
Yeah,
doesn't that is the only way. I mean, it's an evolutionary process that never ends.
it, the difficulty is in order for them to do their jobs most effectively, they need to distill and dry things out as much as possible to eliminate as much bias as possible, as much sentiment as possible. But then the result they get
Yeah,
necessarily is going to have to be reinterpreted back into something, because people are a storytelling species. They they can't really parse data the way it would be required to really get meaning out of this, not without a lot of training or some sort of priming or background for that.
uh, yeah. So about storytelling, it's whenever I tried to explain something about what I did, it was always in my mind. If I can explain what I do to a 6-year-old child,
Right.
then I understand it. And if I can't, then I don't understand it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I have more work to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's the idea for trying to communicate these ideas to the general public, is to have that methodology in mind, and that helps in creating the trust as well.
It would help if they all had poet friends.
That would, yes. That would help. I would think in terms of music and
Right.
symphonies and so forth when I was doing my work and creating, and think of it as being something beautiful in the concept of, what I would call success. There was beauty. There was love. It was beauty.
Well, yeah. Speaking to that, the thing I had been meditating on recently is the sort of notion that at the bottom of all mathematics, for example, which is sort of the heart of all natural philosophy and science, we depend on it. It turns out there are axioms, there are things that cannot be proven. And so aware of those axioms is how scientists can talk with each other. There's a few axioms everyone agrees on because they have to, because it's pragmatic, which was another word that came up that I was interested by in the lecture. So scientists have their pragmatic axioms they stick with, and they're able to communicate with each other because they have the same axioms. Similarly, societies that have the same axioms, whether they share some sort of similar religious beliefs, similar spiritual philosophy, similar dharmas, that if they're both able to admit to each other that they have these axioms, these things they both believe without proof. That is sort of the basis of communication, and everything else can be argued over. But as long as you have those axioms, you have a core of meaning you can always circle back to and make sense of, in basically have other concepts in reference to the thing that you agree on without proof.
Yes, but there's a danger in that if we get stuck in these axioms, it can lead to dogma. And it may not appear to dogma in our own minds, but we get stuck there. And that's an impediment to communication. And so we have to be careful about the assumptions that we make. And these a priori axioms are assumptions.
Well, the first step in making sure that, though, is to recognize that they exist. Is if you can be honest about the things that you are asserting without proof, and you put that right up front on the cover page of your doctoral thesis or whatever, then people can say, okay, that's where they're coming from. This is what they're asserting without evidence. But if you don't do that, if you just leave those things sort of unsaid, and that I think is more dangerous of dogma. The most despicable distortions and misuse of meaning are these assertions I see where they're basically, there's a quiet part that's not being said, and there's this ostensibly very academic and very sound thesis being made, but the underlying axioms that they're working from, which are not spelled out, can sort of be this dogma behind it that you know should be skeptical about. Pseudoscience, for example.
Yeah, so let's bring the conversation back around to development.
Yeah.
Do you,
Well,
John?
yes, let me walk through these themes. First of all, it's wonderful to be with you, Ananta, and to see you again, even virtually. It's wonderful. I think it's important to me to really be sensitive that Ananta is joining us tonight from Chennai. Is that correct?
I am
You are in Chennai.
this
Yeah.
morning. I am in New Delhi, in Delhi.
Oh, you're in Delhi.
Which,
That's fine. That's very fine. I traveled in India. Go ahead.
yes,
I
which is
traveled.
go ahead, please.
What do you say?
So go ahead.
Oh, okay. This was almost 30 years ago when I traveled in Chennai and Bangalore, Mysore, and Kolkata. So 30 years, 30 years. That establishes that context in our conversation, is that I know life in India is not the same as it was 30 years ago, because life on Earth is not the same as it was 30 years ago. And as I'm hearing you speak and I'm connecting with the notion of integral development, I think it's vitally important topic. But I think of India. I'm not going to think of China. I haven't traveled in China. We won't mention it anywhere else in Asia at the moment, or simply to contemplate India in the vastness of culture, societies, languages, I mean, I am drawn to your efforts here, Ananta, at finding language that allows us all to actually join in conversation. Even that is a vast notion. We can enjoin a conversation that for the moment we can say with our language encompasses India. I mean, that's a statement that can be made, but and then we're going on to say, well, we're talking about ideas, is this it? For all the peoples of the whole world. You've also brought in, of course, the religious connection, which for me is vitally important. I'm getting the feeling that you think this global conversation is possible.
Is that a question? Or
That's a question.
I think Ananta is having these global conversations.
Yeah. Do you feel, you know, and in your book, which we have here, that we can find commensurabilities of language and metaphor, as Lisa has brought it up, that allow us to advance, and you know, the other language you've used, evolutionarity, I believe was one of them, it's other language. As we are speaking, did we lose Ananta?
We lost him.
Okay.
Oh.
Oh no, he's back.
There he is.
Okay, keep going, John.
The very premise of our conversation, conversationally, stretches my ability to comprehend. I'm with it. I'm for it. When I think about the whole world and all the human beings who are living with us tonight, and I just find it a bit overwhelming. It's beyond my ability to grasp.
Okay, can I just add some little thing? It has been my experience in the world of music that it transcends culture. That when people who are musicians, in any case, get together from multiple cultures, they have an ability to transcend. I include myself in a small way in that. Transcend the differences of the cultures. Not just in the language of cultures, but the whole idea of what that culture means to the individual. The language of music conveys all of that to everyone who's participating, and everyone can participate together at the same time, making music. So I think it's possible. Sure. I think it's very possible. We have to figure out a way to expand that idea into a more cognitive manner, perhaps. But that's my 2 cents on it.
Oh yeah, that's always going to be tricky because people aren't quite as thoughtful as they tend to think they are. We're a lot more creatures of habit than we are ready to admit most of the time, and that sort of trickles into our interactions interpersonally, interculturally. It does sort of take conscious effort to be considerate in some of these, particularly with the unfamiliar.
I'd like to say something here about the intersections between cultivation and development is something that I was faced with when I began my quest on my book. So I felt that is working on this very controversial artist, and people did not see his art the way I saw it. Like, I had a real visceral connect with his images, the primordial images. And so it's like in the Indian arts, the rasa plays a very important role, is kind of eliciting emotional response from the viewer and the audience so that it touches his soul, right? And that rasa, which is like, being expounded on in the Chitra Sutra, which is our text on the arts. And what came to me at that time was that to elicit rasa in the viewer, many things have to come together. The first of all, it is like, is the work of art, does it have the technique, the mastery, the concept, does it have all this in place, the originality? Does it have all these? Fine, then it's a great work of art. Secondly, is the work of art displayed sympathetically? Whether maybe the work of the curator comes in. How is it displayed? What is the context? And lastly, to really invoke rasa, is the audience, the person who's looking at that work of art, is that person knowledgeable? Not so much about knowledge, but does that person have that kind of sensibility? Has he cultivated that sensibility and sensitivity to be really sensitive, or to be really open, so that that work of art is delivered right into his soul? So kind of my book begins with this quote, which is by the artist: beauty is the final nuance of nature. I'm searching for that beauty. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder, but in the cultivated eye. So the cultivation of that mind and eye to really arrive at beauty in what you're seeing and sensing is very important. And then that's how the intersection between cultivation and development becomes intertwined, that you're cultivating a sensibility and then you're developing and you're evolving. So yeah, I just wanted to share that little bit of how these cultivating, development, and beauty came together for me. And I wanted to share that over here. Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful, thank you.
Well, what role does aesthetics play in development anyway? Does it play a role?
Yes. He was talking about a chapter on ethics and aesthetics.
Okay.
Have Ananta speak to that.
Do you want to say something to the role of aesthetics, Ananta?
Yes, I could, but at the same time, maybe some other friends would share some thoughts.
Okay.
So let us collect one or two more thoughts, including we are inspired by the presence of Professor David Blake Willis, who is with us, and the book is dedicated to him. So, along with some queries, we can listen a little bit from Professor Willis. I'll introduce you. He lives very closer. He lives in Sacramento, California.
Oh, a neighbor.
He'll need to unmute.
Does anybody else have anything that they want to add or ask? If so, just unmute yourself and speak up.
I could go on, but I'd rather give someone else a chance to speak. I had some other notes and questions, but yeah, please, other people, feel free to jump in. That's what I did. Well, I did have a note on Confucianism being sort of the ubiquitous root of philosophy and culture and development in China, and how that uh, it is sort of inherently patriarchal way of developing that way, because it's harmony, but harmony for who is, I suppose, part of the problem there. And the thing that immediately made me think of is it's sort of part and parcel, the same kind of selective interest is part of why the Uyghurs in China, they too, the ones that are trying to do anything there, they're Chinese Communist Party members, because that's the only game in town. They're sort of forced to participate in the system if they want to affect change. And that's can I guess the question is can development be used to affect a change from within, from is someone who's interested in that in sort of a disadvantaged position, would there be any sort of hope for them, for the women and children, for example, speaking back to Confucianism?
Just to make a footnote to that, I think it's the more modern applications of Confucianism that get into the patriarchy. If you actually go back and study the writings of Confucius himself, there isn't much of that. There's more emphasis on right living and the Tao and self-cultivation.
The
Anyhow, but I won't go into a lecture on Confucianism. I'm not a scholar on that.
yeah, I will. Yeah.
Ananta did talk about the war on poverty, and that poor people are integral beings too. And so yes, people who are socially and economically disadvantaged are not necessarily spiritually or culturally disadvantaged. Sometimes they are spiritually rich.
That certainly has been the case. The only thing I would add on that is there's been kind of a concerted effort in the social development of this country to sort of attach just an anchor around their neck of, poverty is a moral failing or something like that. But I don't think that's particularly helpful, and probably needs to be counteracted in some ways, not least of which is pointing out that they are at least as rich and complex as anyone who isn't, living in poverty, and may in fact have perspectives or nuance or spiritual insights that are very much worthwhile. Yeah, I see that.
And Jung would want us to embrace our own wealth and poverty, both inner and outer. It's the integration of the human being. I feel like I'm talking too much, but I'll stop after this. Involves the recognition that all of the opposites live within each and every one of us. And if we dig deep enough, we will find them.
And the recursion of opposites, right? How they sort of flow and bend into each other. I'm trying to recall my non-Western philosophy teachings myself. That was, yeah,
Yeah, I wrote a whole book on it.
yeah. Okay.
Anybody else? Gregory? Robert?
It's such a large topic, but just to piggyback on the thoughts about, I would say, impoverished populations. Just a fitting thought is that is putting this in the context of the fields of oppression at play, and the structures that coerce people in this world. And as the world is becoming more and more objectified, there is this tendency playing by the rule to objectify things to succeed. And when we see the equation like this becomes a major trap for people who don't have access to the basics. They need to partake in the objectification of their world and of themselves to exit um, their prison. And we can it is almost a revolution to talk about beauty, to talk about aesthetic. I would extend to talk about the sacred, and it's almost like talking about modifying a field of oppression to truly change the world uh, instead of playing by the rule. And so I see the value of beauty in the way that it is a valuation of something, of a world that align with greater levels of reality, but with reality that it's almost like an act of resistance to do that, to do so. But yes, we're here very intellectualizing these things, and just hinting at the problem of poverty is it's a little humbling.
I'll say something. In listening to Ananta speak about integral development, I was hearing a lot of themes about consistent with the whole concept of spiritual democracy in there as well, and it's sort of playing on what John was saying to understand and see this concept being developed so internationally in this way. It's very encouraging to me because the whole theme of spiritual democracy is very fundamental to what I'm trying to do. So I was very inspired by that. Ananta, thank you very much for that. I lost the particular reference, but it was somewhere right in there in the middle of chapter 7, 8, 9, somewhere in that range that you spoke about that. And yeah. Is Ananta still with us, or is he get muted, or?
I don't know. I see him.
Yes, thank you, Robert. Yes, and our friends, I would share one or two interlinking sentences thinking together. And Lisa, in the meantime, if it is okay, we can invite Professor David Willis, please, to share a bit of his reflection.
Yes, absolutely. David, if you're available and want to contribute, please unmute yourself. He did say something in the chat about having a family obligation.
Okay.
Yeah, he says he'll be in and out listening because he has a previous family engagement.
So then quickly, yes, Robert, and it's so inspiring that you're, focusing on the key significance of spiritual democracy.
Yes, yes,
Today there is a fundamental crisis of democracy,
absolutely.
and it is also related to, in a way, the inability of the leaders to sing
Yes.
or to speak in a way. Think of our Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg speech,
Uh-huh.
and there is a deep, there is a deep thread between democracy and speaking in a way, communicating in a kindful way, communicating in a way even during the time of the Civil War. And Lincoln spoke in a way which brought us together. And therefore, that was also the spirit of Gandhi, that linking to language, speech, and democracy is that, and that is a spiritual dimension. That
Yes, I think
democracy.
it was your reference to Gandhi that I was focusing on when you in thinking about spiritual democracy. That was at that point.
And manual labor.
Yes, and today, that first of all, democracy has a spiritual dimension, and
Absolutely.
all democracy. And unfortunately, in modernity, because of the anxiety of the political, now that spiritual dimension has been lost, and to the point of also kind of abolition and annihilation. So we try to recover that spiritual dimension in a very practical way. That with our political leaders, and then when we meet, we may not each meet President Biden or President Trump or Vice President Harris, but whatever our interaction with the political, and if in a way that we do not fail in creating these conditions of interactions also as a spiritual interaction, songs, poetry, our own humanity, our own vulnerability, and because our political leaders are all very vulnerable. And the reality is that someone is waiting to go to prison, and it's a reality. And think of, and at the same time, how do we today, our politics has become so much closed, anxiety ridden at every level, and how do we create different initiatives in our own life, in our local community, and which would have an impact, because the kind of work that was done by the civil rights movement 60 years ago,
Mhm.
they could create a new stability in American society. Today, America, for example, requires a different kind of initiative. All the pain and suffering is part of that evolutionary crisis, you know. So therefore, spiritual democracy, the very idea of spiritual democracy needs to be much more talked about, even our political thinking,
Yes.
because our political theory of democracy is very one dimensional. And then and so this is, and secondly about thank you, Grigory, pointing to oppression and the reality of challenge and misery, and what can be called as poverty and social death, because reality, and as President Obama had said, that his mother could not survive cancer because they could not afford. It's a reality. So
Yes.
how do we still and realize, how do we still relate to poverty? in terms of reality of death and destruction, but at the same time, the inherent life force that is there, without romanticizing it, how do we understand the inherent life force that is there? Because it is this life force, it is still making life possible. So, and the other aspect is that, and the poverty, the moral and spiritual poverty, we see that today the moral and spiritual poverty of many is it is like an epidemic. It's an epidemic. So not only we would have to work with material poverty, but the development also has to work with moral and spiritual poverty. And you look at that, why is that? That in all the presidents or everybody today is implicated in a web of life, which is very difficult moral and legal question. And we are all entangled there, and it is not thus that, but we have no work on these moral and ethical challenges. We are not prepared, small little things. So therefore, we need to work on moral and spiritual poverty, not just in a theoretical way, but in an experiential way. And as it happens that, for example, for the rich people, to live with those who are material poor, and there is a long tradition of that. And community development, and America started this program of Peace Corps and others, and all these things have helped a bit. And it is not the only solution. So therefore, we need to think not only theoretically about practice of moral and spiritual poverty, but create processes of awakening. And that is the great challenge for education. And the third thing about beauty is that the beauty and development is that many of the so-called materially challenged people, if you look at their life, there is a kind of inherent beauty. At least I could speak about India, that many of the, because somehow in America, there is a kind of an ideological production of the poor as poor in all respects,
Mm.
and that affects quite a lot. But somehow in India, we are not yet into that totalizing, construction of poverty. Therefore, the beauty that is done in keeping the house, our indigenous people, their house is very beautiful in the way it is kept, and so therefore, as with all our life, beauty as an aspect of life, it is in that sense. Our poor people, materially poor people, also have integral beauty in their life, in our lives, to acknowledge that. Secondly, development as a process and practice to create more beauty, thinking about the laboratory. Our respected friend talked about laboratory. Now, the question is to construct a laboratory where there would be also some artistic pictures. Do you ever find, varieties of artworks in the wall of a laboratory? Can we begin our laboratory work with a prayer or even a song, the kind of songs which we sing during drinking? Why not begin the laboratory experiment with the singing? And so many kind of works of beauty we can create. And because the whole idea of beauty as a self-generative process is not just that we do not buy an artwork, as Michael Foucault, the great thinker, says, that when we go to a temple, we realize, oh, how beautiful the lamp in the temple is. But we do not realize our own life as a work of art. So therefore, how do we realize each one of our life as a work of art, not only my life, your work life, and this work of art is not a fixed work of art. It is a multidimensionally evolving and generative work of art.
Yes. Thank you.
it's a little late, but something also that strikes me is when you talk about creating more beauty, you gave this example of artworks in a laboratory. It really makes me think about the transdisciplinarity of Barbara Nicolescu. I mean, the topic of transdisciplinarity in general, which aim at creating a dialogue across disciplines as an attempt to exit the ultra specialization of these disciplines, and by having people together uh, creating these bridges by voluntarily going on this quest to sharing in a very eclectic way their world, but with the only common point of carrying a question or attempting to solve a problem that can be a problem of a community or a problem linked with a place, eventually reach a new level of understanding of creativity, what's called by Barbara Nicolescu the hidden third, almost like this creation of a new way of seeing the world by purposely bringing people from different horizons together and entertaining this phase in the act of creation. So transdisciplinarity comes to my mind when I hear you.
Yes, indeed. And how transdisciplinarity also has a spiritual dimension, via aesthetics and others. But I am working now on a book called Transdisciplinarity and Trans-Civilizational Dialogues.
Oh, okay.
Therefore, how the very idea of discipline, now we use the word discipline. Discipline has multiple connotations. In India also, there is a very interesting language and practice called sadhana, which refers to striving. So how do we realize discipline as sadhana and discipline as a musical practice or as a practice? So, and then also understanding poverty in a transdisciplinary way, and not only the economics of poverty, but also the spiritual dimensions of poverty. As I speak with you, I also relate to John's very important comments, and
You're muted, John. Lisa, you are muted.
Sorry. We like to maintain our temporal boundaries and realizing that people have other things to do and places to go. And so we like to end, well, we're a little late, but, relatively promptly. So I ask everybody to just join together virtually and thank Ananta for joining us from India. We are very grateful.
Yes.
And honored to have your presence with us this evening, this morning for you. There's Janita in Goa. So we have a very international group here.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Ananta.
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, Ananta.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste. I request to kindly help me with the email of all our friends,
Okay.
even Janita, Rama, Grigory, and John. Also, our respected other friend whom we met in San Francisco.
Yes.
What is his name? He's David.
He's trying to think of somebody in San Francisco.
Was it
No,
was
he
it
was
the,
he was with us this morning. He is present this morning. I'm just recollecting our friend's name. He's the with the hat.
Not
Debashish?
Banerjee.
Do you mean Debashish Banerjee?
No, from Monterey. He's from Monterey.
From Monterey. There was
Came
Dave.
to our meeting.
Are you talking about David from Watsonville?
Yes, that,
Yeah.
From Watsonville.
Yes, Ananta. We spent a fair amount of time talking in San Francisco, and we said we wanted to get together, and we never were able to do that. So I still hope to that we can get together at some point here and have a longer discussion. Yes, I would enjoy that.
thank you, David. Thank you. And I request you to kindly send your email and we will have our communication.
All right. So next week is
Next week is Marshall McLuhan, War and Peace in the Global Village.
so feel free to join us, same time. John will send out a new link for next week's session. All right. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
good night and
Thank
good
you.
morning.
Good night and good morning.
Thank you.
Ah.